Hello, everyone. Hi. Woo! Can I get your attention, please? Hi, thank you all so much for coming out tonight despite the rainy weather. My name is Olivia. I am the publicity director here at Or Books. We are the proud publishers of this book right here, The Activism of Art. This is the event that you're here for tonight. Books are for sale in the front, and I'm sure Dipti and Stephen will sign them afterwards if that's something you're interested in. So Or Books is a small publishing house. We're actually located behind that projector screen in the back of this bar. Small but mighty, if you want to come see our spot back there. If you want to write about the publishing house in the back of a bar, we're also taking takers for that. Preferably for the New Yorker, Talk of the Town. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, really, if you want to. And we publish a wide array of books. We pride ourselves in having an alternative business model and alternative content that you may not otherwise see. So come to us for books by Julian Assange, about Palestine, about the activism of art. We also run a really wonderful events programming series. We'll have 3 events in May. The sheets of paper lying around let you know about that, and we hope that you'll come to them. There'll be some more that are announced as well. For now, though, I'm going to introduce the co-editors of this wonderful book, Dipti Desai and Stephen Duncombe. They are... Yes. They'll be introducing the 4 artists that are featured tonight as well and whose work you're going to be able to see. Stephen is the co-founder of the Center for Artistic Activism. They also do a number of wonderful events. Check them out. And Dipti is a professor and co-director of the Art Plus Education program at NYU. I'll have you guys come up.
Hi, everybody. So thank you for coming. This is really wonderful to be here again. I mean, it is a real honor to be published by, Colin Robinson, who's been my publisher for like 35 years when we were small. But also, more importantly, it's a press that's in the back of a bar. I mean, how cool is that? Any case, what we're going to do is I'm going to talk, Dipti's going to talk, but then what we want to do is open the stage really quickly to why you're here, which is, yes, to buy the book, of course, but also to hear from 4 amazing artistic activists and about how they're responding. So I want to start by talking a little bit about what we do at the Center for Artistic Activism, because it's germane to this. By and large, shorthand is we work with artists to get them to strategize a little bit more like activists, and activists to create a little bit more like artists. And we go around the world. I think we worked in about 35 different countries with thousands of activists and artists, and we always start our workshops with the same question. What made you become an activist? What made you step off the curb? And what people do is they tell stories. And these stories are varying, obviously, with where you are in the world, with who the person is, what their background is. But what's really revealing about their stories is what they don't say. No one has ever said, I became an activist because I went to a press conference. Or I became an activist because someone came up with me with a petition. Or I became an activist because someone sent me an email. Or I became an activist because I did an Instagram reel. Or I became an activist because I read a white paper or even went to a teach-in. Not that these things aren't important, but that's not why they became an activist. And when they do talk about becoming activists, what they talk about is experiences they had in their lives. Deeply felt emotional experiences. Things which transformed their life because it transformed their heart. It transformed their soul. It didn't just speak to their head, it spoke to their body, it spoke to their emotions, to use the expensive term, affective experiences. And so I started out as a community organizer in this neighborhood 30 years ago. And essentially, I would ask people to sign petitions and things like that. And one of the things I learned is that's not how you get people excited. That's not how you get people actually in the streets. You have to touch them emotionally. At that time, the Lower East Side, before our wonderful university came in and jacked up the rents on everybody, it was a hotbed of artists. And what I learned from artists was that they communicate at an affective register. They touch us, they move us. We talk about art moving us, but art really does move us. It moves us off the sidewalk and it moves us into the street. That affect is really, really important. But what's great about both the folks that we talk about in here, but also the folks that are going to be talking to you here, is they don't stop with affect. They marry affect to effect. Okay? That is the idea they marry emotion and mobilizing emotion with bringing about real material transformations. And so at the Center for Artistic Activism, we try to marry affect and effect. We created a new word, which I'm going to do a shout out to our Scandinavian friend. How do you pronounce it? Effect, which is you put the A and the E together. And it's a good way of thinking about what art activism does. It's a marriage of affect and effect. It moves us emotionally, so it actually transforms material change. And so now I'm going to turn it over to my co-editor, Dipti, to talk a little bit about the book we put together.
Thanks. Well, thank you all for coming and being here on a rainy day. This book really began several years ago now, basically in a basement bar with Kathy Ingalls and Marlene, where we would sit and talk. And then I started to talk to Steve. We both teach classes on art and activism. And there really isn't a book, so we sort of collate our articles together. But in our conversations, we wanted to create an anthology that was different from what we put together for our classes. And we had a lot of discussions about trying to open up this anthology in terms of time and space across different, trying to go across the globe, but also across time. So there's Plato, and there is, indigenous scholars who are writing in the present. It is an anthology that we joke about it being a gesture towards decoloniality, because I grew up in India, but I was trained in Western epistemology, and I have a Western cognitive sense of self, even though in my body in India, I'm different. And so we had a lot of really wonderful conversations about spirituality. Like I remember bringing up this one author that I know, Rabindranath Tagore, whose work isn't, if you really read his book, it doesn't, smack of activism in any way. But we had these long conversations about beauty and spirituality, and if those could be forms of activism, and how might they be forms of activism. And of course, thinking across different worldviews, resistance, tradition becomes a form of resistance. It's not something that you just follow, day to day. But for indigenous people, the very fact that they're still alive today is a form of resistance. So for them to really learn about their own languages and their own arts and traditions and crafts is a form of resistance. And so we sort of had a lot of amazing conversations about how to put this book together. And, we did negotiate a few authors back and forth. I wanted one, and Steve would say, well, then you have to have Matthew Arnold. And I was like, really? Do we really have to have authors?
It's also copyright free.
Right, okay. But it was a negotiation between having, a Matthew Arnold who has a very particular understanding of art and politics to someone like Bell Hooks or Gloria Anzaldúa. And so the book really puts in dialogue a lot of different scholars across time and space. That's about it. And without much ado, I'm going to introduce some of the artists and really have them spend some time showing their work and talking about a question that we posed to them: what does it mean to do artistic activism in these times? And so I'm going to start with Avram Finkelstein. Avram is an artist, writer, and a founding member of Silence Equals Death and Grand Fury collectives. He was a recipient in 2024 of the Creative Capital Grant and in 2023 the Pollock Kastner Grant. His work has been shown in MoMA, in Brooklyn Museum, across the globe. His iconic poster, Silence Equals Death, and the work of Grand Fury has been shown all over the world and is really important. I'm not even going to list all the places he's shown. They're far too long. I will be here for the next half hour. But he does have a book. He's featured in an artist oral history project for the Smithsonian Archives of American Art. And his book, which was published by University of California Press, is called Silence, A History of AIDS Through Its Images, was nominated for the 30th Annual Lambert Literary Award in the LGBTQ plus nonfiction section and the International Center of Photography. He's been written up in New York Times, Frieze, Art Forum, etc. So I think we'll start with you, Avram, and right? And then we'll move to the others.
All right, where's the better light? This is better light. So, for my face, I think this was, because Dipti was falling into the shadows. I made notes because if I don't, I'll go right down the rabbit hole. But if I go down a rabbit hole anyway, somebody grab me by my ankles and pull me out, please. So this question, in order to address this political moment, I'd like to first talk about the past. As someone who's witnessed the terrors of the world multiple times, I'm older than I look, I certainly understand the panic over the idea that Trump could order the National Guard to shoot protesters. But this is something that's already happened, and I'm not just talking about him wanting to do it at the Black Lives Matter protests in DC. When I was 18, the National Guard gunned down protesters at Kent State. This is a very famous image from that. My mother told me to pack a bag and keep it under my bed. And she said, when they start gunning down students, it's the beginning of a fascist takeover. That triggered a deeper understanding that anyone who's sat at the margins of institutional power in America sees very clearly that America, I might have just trashed my notes inadvertently. Yeah, I think I did. So I am going to improvise. Anyone who's stood at the margins of power in America already knows that America has been dancing on the edge of fascism since the beginning. So the idea that gunning down students should be a trigger point is a fantasia of the American mind. It's a lie of the American mind. I should probably try to find my notes again. Or I really will get lost. Let's see the next slide. Maybe that will give me a better sense of it. So my dad was a Bolshevik, just like his father was before him. And when I first did this poster and became involved with, as a founding member of ACT UP New York, he said, Ave, I'm really proud of what you're doing, but there'll never be a revolution in America so long as there are television sets. To which I said, yeah, but I have two choices. One is to do something, to not do anything, and I know what will happen. People will continue to die. And the other choice is to do something, and if it doesn't work, try something else. And I think that that's a key point of what artistic activism or activism more generally is for. We have to rescale the ways in which we think about social spaces depending on the needs of that point in time. Can we have the next slide? Maybe that will give me some ideas. So this is how the poster looked in situ in Manhattan prior to the formation of ACT UP. It's a poster that when I would speak to people about it prior to the formation of the AIDS activist movement that it came to be identified with, people would say, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. It makes no sense, and don't do it. But I wasn't actually asking for permission. I am just a person who believes, I guess I should put this away, who believes that there is no idea that can't be improved by multiple minds. So I was asking people what they thought. I was not asking them for permission. So the AIDS activist movement that followed in its tracks, I didn't really realize when we made this poster exactly what we had done before the activists gave meaning to this poster. The poster could have come and gone in the middle of the night, and I wouldn't be here speaking to you. Nobody would know about it. And the reason it didn't come and go in the middle of the night was activists responded to it. It's the activists who responded to it that gave meaning to this work. Yes, we worked for 9 months. It was, we spent a lot of time packing it with codes and ideas and fighting about what would work and what wouldn't. In that day and age that Steve was talking about, I wanted, way back when, I came out of political activism in a way that made me think, well, we should be making a manifesto. And someone else in the collective said, no, it's Reagan's America. Nobody's going to stand on a street corner and read a manifesto. It has to be advertising. So I think that one of the keys to understanding communication is understanding context, reinventing context, rethinking it. We chose to make a poster, the Silence Equals Death poster, as a way that mimicked advertising because it was Reagan's America, and because of deregulation and tax abatements in New York City, there was a building boom and there were tons of spaces to wheat paste posters that you had to pay to have wheat pasted. That's how we ended up with that strategy. But I think it's not an idea or a gesture that's replicable. I was saying to someone before we started talking, we didn't always carry computers in our pockets. People actually used the streets as a way of communicating. And I think the thing about looking at this work as some sort of model, it's a model of something. If you read my book, you'll know exactly all of the inside baseball that went into the making of that poster. We worked on it for 9 months, but that poster is not an example of something that I would do today, for instance. So this is a drawing that was made by one of the members of the collective. The Silence Equals Death poster was actually designed a few blocks from here on 5th Street, just off Avenue A. And once we had finally decided what the poster should say, we broke into a conversation about what it should look like. This is a sketch made by one of the members of the collectives who loved color. So I wanted to show this to you as an example of something being improved by multiple minds. Imagine if Oliver had his way and the background of the poster was blue. Can we see the next slide? So this is an exhibition of my work that's currently up at Smack Mellon in Brooklyn. And it's about disability in the body, but it's a consideration of the feminist critiques of the ways in which we think about the body, the ways we think about healthcare, well-being, that we're trained to think that the body is a mystery. But inside of us is a solar system. Each of us has a different solar system, and it's changing all the time. That's interior. So I wanted to think about disability from a perspective of permeability, evanescence, mutability. This is work that if someone else is looking at it while you're looking at it, it changes the work. You're seeing them through the work. It's only partially visible in certain lights. All of the work is very lightweight substrates. When you walk by it, they blow in the wind or rattle and make noise. It's a meditation on what I'm trying to say about disability is if you're disabled, you are at this simultaneously invisible and you're in the way. So I wanted to find a way to articulate from a gestural, informal perspective and to activate the social space. As an artist who has, up until recently, most of my work the work that I'm known for was made for public spaces. I've started to think that every space, even on our pocket computers, every space is simultaneously accessible and restricted. And I think actually what is effective about public art is it's the activation of a social space. So this exhibition was an experiment with trying to figure out other ways to activate the white cube, which I hate, but I hate the white cube, but here I am. It has windows, so it's not entirely a white cube. And as Steve pointed out, New York used to be a place where you could come and live in the East Village, not have a job, not be accepted into a graduate program. You could come here and live for $300 a month and wait on tables and make a mess of your life. You could do drugs, you could try to figure things out, you could make mistakes. NYU has made that impossible for artists to ever live in New York again. But even as recently as the mid-90s, you could move to the East Village and live for $300. Now sorry, Steve, you opened the door. Now NYU has made that impossible and trades off of teaching about the bohemian past that can no longer live in the East Village. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Avram. Next up is going to be Marisa Jahn, and I'm going to do this because I'm getting old. So Jahn, through her work, directly engages new immigrant families and low-wage workers and millions more via venues like the Tribeca Film Festival, the United Nations, Obama's White House, the Venice Biennale of Architecture, the Guggenheim Museum, many, many international media outlets, and, which I just found out, Pokemon Go. She'll be available to talk about that later. Jahn has received awards from Sundance, Creative Capital, Anonymous as a Woman, and the Joyce Foundation. She's a senior researcher at MIT, which is her alma mater, and the director of integrated design at Parsons and the New School. She's the co-author of Design and Solidarity. She co-founded Care House, which is the U.S.'s first care-based co-housing project. She co-created Hoop Cycle, think Mesoamerican basketball meets tricycles, and collaborates on various architectural and urban scale projects. Just personally, Marisa's one of that work when we talk about affect and effect, where she's constantly thinking about both of them simultaneously and putting them together in very inventive ways that have direct impact on people's lives. So, Marisa, please come up.
Next one. So, thanks so much. I'm really excited about this book because it's so epistemologically and pedagogically useful as someone who's a teacher. And so excited to be in conversation with you all. So my work, to use a term, Czesław Wodiczko's term of the inner public, I draw on my own background as a second-generation immigrant of a Chinese father. My mother is from Ecuador. And I create artwork that, next. That draws on these experiences to visibilize, well, the experiences of new immigrants and working families. And I'm interested in activating ideas of civic memory. I'm interested in activating public space and broadcasting these works to a larger public. So my work scales from works on paper to public space, to architectural and urban scales. So I was going to highlight 2.5 projects. The first one is Biblu Bandido, which the best translation to it in English would be Story Eater. And 15 years ago, this community in rural Honduras invited me to collaborate. It was an open-ended conversation, but to collaborate around and create a literacy something. And what we did was, this is a rural community. Honduras, if it's, to give you context, is the second poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere after Haiti. And the average GDP is around $700 USD. And the education infrastructure is threadbare. And the reason why they invited me was to, again, collaborate on something that had to do with literacy. And what we did was we invented this idea of a character who eats stories, and he's so hungry for the stories written by little kids, not by adults. They're stale and boring if they're written by adults. But to write, it kind of instigated this legend wherein this character comes on a monthly or seasonal basis to consume the stories written by little kids. And what happened was, after we staged this project on this, road, that the people called the cops. It was this pre-cell phone, pre-screens. People called the cops, and the cops came. And for people there, the cops never come. So the fact that he came meant that it stamped it in everybody's memory that it was a real thing. And I went back, I'm working on this documentary film, and it's like this moment when you're, when you say, where were you when JFK was shot? Where were you when 9/11 happened? Where were you when you heard about the pandemic? But this is like stamped in everybody's memory in this La Cuenca Cangrejales, this river valley. Everyone's like, I remember I was in this place when I heard that there was a bandit coming to town for stories. So it's this kind of formative moment. And so now that's 15 years ago, and for the youth that I worked with, who were about between 9 and 14, they became the leaders of the project, and even without my knowing, because again, it was pre-cell phone, they had instated this ritual wherein the third week of every month was Biblo Bandido week. The Wednesday, they would create new characters and episodes, and on that following Sunday, they would enact it with one of the 19 participating pueblos. So it's like the living kind of soap opera, kind of legend. He is bigger than Santa Claus. And then what's really interesting is when you ask people, like, who's bigger, Santa Claus or Biblo Bandido? They're like, Biblo Bandido, because we invented him. So what's really interesting is on the one hand, there's this double consciousness taking place, where people know that they invented him, they know that they created the arch enemy, and like all these elaborate things. It's this really elaborate cosmology, but they also believe in it. So it's like this. It's a really interesting structure that they know that they invented it. So this is showing the diaspora of Biblo Bandido believers, and I've brought him here to libraries. And museums in North America, but really his legend is unrivaled in Honduras. Next. Okay. The second project, I'm really fascinated, about this question of the affect and effect. I'm really interested in this question of micropublics and audiences. This project is a hoopsicle, which is at the National Museum of Public Housing in Chicago, whose grand opening was just this past weekend. And it is a Mesoamerican basketball court on wheels. So this is a video of the museum ambassadors, who are all public housing residents. And we're testing out how it works and so forth. And it's riffing off of this basketball court, which harkens from 4000 BCE, from Peru all the way up to Arizona. So it really kind of changes how we think about basketball and contemporary pop culture, sports culture. And so can I do a quick thing? Can you raise your hand if you've seen one of these images, the Mesoamerican basketball? Okay, it's usually audiences about half-half. So this, again, 4,000 years ago, and the courts looked totally different, and the way that you got the ball in was that you bonked it in with your elbow or your shoulder or your hip. It didn't bounce, and it was about passing it. And in some cases, this is a 13-pound ball, sometimes with the skull of one of the other players inside the skull. They were become memorialized. We didn't do that. So this isn't like a bone-shattering game with high stakes. And we contemporized. It was reinvented in 1891 by James Naismith. Do we have any basketball fans here? I did not grow up in this culture, so it's ethnographic interloping for me. So he reinvented it in 1891. And I just want to point out, by 1893 was the first moment when the first women's basketball team in the Jane Addams Hull House arose, which is fascinating. So we're talking about working class immigrant women first basketball team. Okay, next. Next. So it goes up and down, so you can move it to different locations. So it's Life in Chicago will be activating different spaces, going around different public spaces to transform an urban space into a zone of play and activating the history of basketball and public housing. Next. This is Lisa Lee, who is the director of the museum, and she is writing it in Chicago. This is Church, who was one of the construction workers who was working on the museum, who would take time off to go play it. He was a basketball fan. Next. Oh, this is where it lives. So you drive it into this little kind of zone here at the top, and the white is where you can score. And I will say that immediately what happens with the hoopsicle is that it feels more accessible. It's the same height. One of the rims, the vertical rims, is the same height as a regular basketball rim. Next. But it feels more accessible. And so we would have, little old ladies coming to play basketball who might not otherwise play basketball. Now, when I was designing this court, there's a hoopsicle. The place where it lives is called Oops. This is, and these are the Oops suits. And what I was imagining was like, oh, it's so interesting to me to transform these normal lines going down the street that regulate our civic experience into an artwork. And I imagine that the act of creating the Oops court itself was an act of painting with this striper next. And so I designed these suits so that myself and the stripers and the cinematographer, while we're painting the court like this, it's like a live painting, and we're part of the work. Next. So this is what that perspective looks like, and this is this virtuosic striper. Yeah, next. So I like thinking about, I like thinking about what it would be like to have an artist in resident in every parking lot. B, I like this idea that it transforms how we might see the streets. Next. Okay, yeah, so what is public housing? When I first moved to New York as an adult, I lived in public housing, but I didn't know that it was public housing. Next. Because it was a multi-generational place where the way that it was built was there was a courtyard and there was a playground and everybody was playing and laughing, and I just remember the sounds of kids laughing and multiple people around, so it felt very safe watching these kids and just being in that space. And so I wanted to create, as an artist in resident with the National Public Housing Museum, I wanted to create work that celebrated that feeling of joy and play. So when we think about public housing, that history in part is Abraham Lincoln, when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which is essentially freeing enslaved people, Black Americans and white Americans. He also created the Homestead Act, wherein if you sat on a piece of land for long enough, it would become yours. So essentially, it's this form of government subsidy, but it was an equalizer. When we're also looking about public housing, we also can't forget that in this form of subsidy, it's like, okay, so usually what for North Americans or people in the U.S., it conjures up this idea that $51 billion in housing assistance for lower income families is exceeded by the $76 billion to support first-time middle-class homeowners. So it's really about, of course, the demonization of the working class and lower-income people. And we can't couple and talk about housing and racial segregation go hand in hand. Next. Yeah, maybe I'll close. Well, go through. I will say that papel picado the hoopsicle has this perforated board, and I'm drawing on that in this tradition of this Mesoamerican tradition, papel picado, perforated paper, which is also a Chinese paper craft tradition, wherein the holes are said to let the past come through. So my question is, what pasts do we want to come through? So for me, this is you can go through quickly through these images, but these are moments, this is wallpaper on multiple floors of the National Public Housing Museum, in which I'm drawing on the archive of Baltimore public housing residents from 68 to 72, and it's low-income, predominantly black women who were enfranchised to advocate for the things that they wanted to see in their community. They received money on a federal level from Model Cities program that flowed through community organizations, which is makes me want to cry when I think about like how federal money is being allocated today. And these women were advocated by civil rights organizers like MLK and Fannie Lou Hamer, who noticed the density and the mobilization of these women who were enacting these changes, and they came to provide that capacity support. So I'll end on what I feel is a hopeful note. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisa. And at a moment in which history is literally being rewritten and re-represented, the idea of being able to present and remember other histories is super important. Just before this, I was talking to Avram about that our organization received a letter from the NEA saying, one, we've cut all your funding, and two, we will only be funding, and someone with a sense of humor at NEA must have created this, we will only be funding projects which celebrate the Declaration of Independence. In those spaces, maybe we can create other things and create ways of looking at the past so we don't forget the past that we have. The next artist we have up here is Shaun. I've worked with Shaun for a long time now. And I love working with Shaun because he's one of the most thoughtful artists I've ever worked with. He also speaks in complete sentences and paragraphs without saying an as I just did, which is, I find absolutely amazing. Anyway, I digress. Shaun is a Brooklyn-based artist from Queens, New York City. His multidisciplinary work negotiates societal expectations of manhood, most often definitions surrounding black and brown masculinities, along with its notions of achievement, collective identity, and experience of failure. His performance practices are participatory and invested in process of embodiment. He received his MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute and is a recipient of support from Creative Capital, Guggenheim Social Practice, Art for Justice, and A Blade of Grass. His work has been featured at the Guggenheim Museum, the Highline New Museum, Four Freedoms Park Conservancy, and profiled in the New York Times and CNN. And he has just rejoined Socrates Sculpture Park in Queens as the co-director. So give a warm welcome to Shaun.
I'm going to focus my delivery on one project in particular entitled Assembly. Ben Davis, how you doing? And I'm going to preface what I share with you by saying that, by answering the question in the beginning and saying that I no longer am the practitioner that conducts assembly, for important reasons that I will get to. Now, I initiated assembly as part of my practice now 9 years ago. And it grew out of a collaborative effort with artists Melanie Crean and Sable Elise Smith in conjunction with both formerly incarcerated individuals and other individuals that have been impacted by the justice system, namely young folks either with parents or siblings currently incarcerated, or young folks themselves enrolled in alternatives to incarceration programs. Now, around the 3-year mark of the trajectory of that project, I was invited by the nonprofit Recess in Brooklyn to think about that work and my practice in relation to deeper stakes, a direct intervention in the court system. Fast forwarding a little bit, we've now been working for 8 years with young people in something called a diversion practice, which essentially means that rather than have a young person pursue their case in court, they come to something like assembly. And upon completion of that program, their cases are closed and their records are sealed. Now, at the core of that project is a methodology which looks at the impossibility of articulating experiences with arrest and or incarceration, traumatic experiences, the impossibility of articulating those experiences through verbal language, and instead we throw away words and look at what is expressed through the body. That core methodology stems from the argument that in order for an individual to see themselves differently and to not define themselves by their experiences with something like arrest or incarceration, that we must start with the body. That therefore, in order to lead someone towards something that resembles healing, we have to locate their stories and how they've been housed by the body, and to see how these preconceived notions of criminality have been imposed on their bodies and psyches. Now, I can go on and on about the methodology. The thing that is important about this project and practice is this. In 9 years, we have closed more than 300 cases and welcomed well over that in numbers of young people into assembly. Thank you. And I'd like to always say, introducing this as a project, as an artistic project, that those numbers don't mean shit. Because a young person's relationship with law enforcement continues even when that case has been closed. And so our investment in this young people is not in a case. It is in rebuilding the agency and how they tell their own stories, and therefore how they see themselves, in order to navigate, if not power, possibility. Now, I started by saying to you that I have left this as part of my practice. And that's not entirely true. That's not entirely true, because the methodology is still very core to everything that I do. I should maybe speak to the slides for a moment. Everything that you've seen is not the program itself in practice, because that has always been conducted in complete anonymity. Instead, what you are seeing are moments throughout its 8 years in which the young people themselves have elected to express the work outwardly and have constructed a space in which the intent of the methodology can pull audience members in to create a closer proximity to their own experiences and the realities of the criminal legal system. Around the 5 or 6 year mark, I started to realize that there was an energetic shift around the work. What I want to convey to you is that the reverberations of what we're now experiencing started well before this second administration of Trump. That, for us, as specific to the justice system, manifested itself with the arrival of Mayor Eric Adams, in which all of a sudden there was less investment, fewer phone calls being picked up, less programmatic possibilities in our arrangement with court system partners. And it was and while it was confusing, and while it required us maneuvering power differently and continuing to evolve the program and shapeshift in order to try to find the levers of power and to try to maneuver and move in ways that can continue and sustain our practice, I can tell you this. What became clear is that we hired a fucking cop as mayor. And therefore, the return to status quo, and as it relates to law enforcement, the idea that punishment is the default, and therefore the notion that a criminalizing logic, one that deems young people as worthless and disposable, is the environment that we are now increasingly living in. That, as I said, is in and of itself regressive, but is also the thing that we've always competed against. And so what do we do? I want to be literal about the question that was posed to us. I left the program because ultimately it was a program and ceased being an artistic project that I could maneuver with boldness. As a program, it needed to exist and sustain itself within the conditions of a nonprofit, which left me without ideas as to how I might be courageous in shape-shifting and navigating this administration, which again started well before Trump's new arrival. And so I decided to myself, best to leave it to other individuals to breathe new life into, and for me to think about a recalibration. And so I took 2 months off, in which I created no work whatsoever. And now feel like I have a different platform, which I'll get to in a moment. I reflect back on the pandemic, which of course created different conditions of urgency, but I can recall very much being amidst the height of Assembly's power and being called to respond to urgency, as it pertained to the pandemic that very much revolved around the increased and incredibly drastic suffering that was occurring on Rikers Island, with so many warehouse bodies being at increasing risk with COVID. And I can recall the calls to mobilize and create aesthetic work in relation to activist campaigns that were moving out in the world to try to, I can tell you this, that was some of the worst work I've ever made in my life. To respond to that type of agitation and with that type of frenetic frequency. I'm one of those artists that believe that artistic activism works at a different pace. And that to invest in the relational aesthetics and to invest in community building requires a different kind of time and calibration. And that's where I arrived in leaving Assembly and giving myself this moment to say, like, what must be? And so to answer the question, what does it mean to perform artistic activism today? I think in order to create or move toward bolder, more daring decisions, we also have to risk abandoning the forms of our work that we've come to know. Throw it all away in order to reinvent possibilities. Now, for me, that is, as Stephen shared, I've rejoined Socrates Sculpture Park, a place that I've been very close to for over 25 years. And part of the invitation that I was excited about was this idea of a much more public platform that would enable me to look at diversion philosophically very differently, with stakes in a place with a public that can be greeted in with care and accountability well before any involvement in the criminal legal system. And therefore enacting a practice that looks at accountability to a people, and in this case, very specifically talking about young people and the population at Astoria Houses, which butts up against the park. those same constituents that helped create that place as a public that is our caring community and our priority. And therefore, looking at the entire organization and what we might provide as an art project. I'm hopeful in that. But what it will require is me reminding myself that I don't know and completely scrapping what I thought I know in order to reinvent possibilities in a very different environment and doubling down in relationships and the ways in which that relational work guides decision making. So come back to me in a few months and I'll tell you what happens, okay? Thanks.
Thank you, Shaun, and thank you, Betty. I'm delighted to have Betty be not the last or the least speaker. I've known Betty for quite a while now, and we've worked at a couple of organizations together, the Fourth Arts Block being one that I work with fairly closely, that's here on the Lower East Side on 4th Street. Betty Yu is an award-winning filmmaker, socially engaged multimedia artist, photographer, and activist born and raised in New York City. She integrates documentary film, photography, installation, new media platforms, and community-infused approaches into her practice. Betty's films and multimedia work have focused on labor, immigration, gentrification, abolition, racism, militarism, transgender equality, among other issues. She's a co-founder of Chinatown Art Brigade, which is a collective that uses art to advance anti-displacement fights, and it's done a lot of work in Chinatown. One of the things Chinatown Art Brigade does is network with other organizations. Give a shout out to Decolonize This Place, Mars, and works with a lot of nonprofits. Actually, one nonprofit in particular, Cave, right? Cave in Chinatown. And one of the things that I remember Avram sort of saying to me was that art in itself really can't do a whole lot. It can move you, but you really need to work with nonprofit organizations. And so for Grand Fury, you worked with ACT UP, and that was what made it even more powerful. And I think Betty Yu's work sort of working with a number of different organizations and nonprofit organizations has been really important. Her documentary, Resilience, about garment workers and mothers fighting sweatshop conditions, screened at film festivals, including the Margaret Mead Film Festival. So her work has, like all of the other artists, been exhibited and screened at several museums, from Brooklyn Museum, Queens Museum, the New York Historical Society, various artist spaces, Whitney Museum, biennials, Apex Art, and on and on. Her multimedia installation, Resistance in Progress, highlights housing activism in Flushing, was featured at the Queens Museum, and her first solo exhibition, Displaced in Sunset Park, opened at the Open Source Gallery. She's won a number of awards, and Betty holds a BFA from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and an MFA in Integrated Media Arts from Hunter College. She's taught at several universities, Hunter College, Pratt Institute, Marymount Manhattan College, John Jay College, the New School, and she's currently a visiting assistant professor of media production at Marymount Manhattan College. So without, thanks.
I feel like I'm done, that's it. Good night. That was a long, sorry I have to read all that. I'm gonna try to be mindful of time because I know it's a lot of talking at you all. But yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Excited to dig into the book and use it also in teaching. I wanted to start with this medley of images, which is now not moving, but it was a GIF. Oops, should be going, I don't know. So this is the film that I made a long, long time ago, and it really kind of shows kind of how I was not, there was no choice for me to get involved in, activism or organizing, right? It came to me in the sense that, is there a way to make it move? No. Sorry. I think if you click it, maybe? It's not going. Anyway, maybe you saw it before. So these are stills from the film, and it really documents in the mid-'90s and the late '90s organizing that my mom and many other garment workers and restaurants led in Chinatown, Manhattan's Chinatown. And I got thrown into the work because of what I was seeing and how long hours and low wages was really robbing me of my time with my parents, both of my parents garment workers, and they got involved with organizing, challenging even the unions at the time that were really doing a terrible job of representing their members. And I got really heavily involved with a group called Chinese Staff and Workers Association for decades, and I documented our work. My sister went on hunger strike and basically helped change conditions with other students, and they gained, at that time, the largest settlement for restaurant workers at that time in 1995. Jingfeng Restaurant, which was the second unionized restaurant, Silver Palace being the first. And so I was involved in that and during that struggle. And I'm so sorry. There's all these protest images from the 90s and all this. But that's how I really got my start. It wasn't a choice for me, like I said. It was just kind of in my blood. And I started photographing and filming. And yes, I went to NYU Film School and all of that. But I walked away from it for many years because I really got disgusted with the elitism, even in the documentary world at NYU. And so I did direct organizing for a while, and I basically continued to do the work. And when we talk about sort of agency and accountability, and when we work with communities, right, what does that actually really look like? And for me, it's embedding yourself in really relationship building, deep grassroots organizing. And so I consider myself an organizer for a really, really, really long time before I came back to doing media work. So yeah, there we go. And so these are some photos of garment factories at that time, really horrible conditions. Many of them were unionized factories. My sister who went on a hunger strike. So if you go to the next slide, and I'll just kind of, and then I started to really, through my own personal story and projects, it's a real sort of opening and a portal and a lens to seeing not only what other Chinese Americans' lives are like, and how not only the resilient part, but the resistance part, but really a window into working class folks and immigrants right in this country. I found out very late, about 10 years ago, that I had a grandfather who I knew him. I was really little, but he founded one of the first labor organizations in the country, which was called Chinese Hand Laundry Alliance in New York, and it was a communist organization that was targeted by the FBI. My parents never talked about him, but I had these photo albums from the 20s to the 70s, photos that he took. Long story short, I come to realize that I actually have 4 generations of my family in the US, but because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, they couldn't really build roots here. So I embarked on that part of my personal sort of story and digging deeper. And so some of the images that you can just kind of scroll through, this is weaving in my grandfather's story and my mom's story, as sort of, fighting for better conditions. I mean, his time was in the 30s, my mother was in the 80s and 90s, right? But weaving this through a garment machine, a sewing machine that I gutted using a program where you could interact with the sewing machine and watch videos and experience these stories. And if you keep going, and then I started to build upon that, and I had oral histories through the organizing, collected oral histories of many, many garment workers who you would think were these sort of, the stereotype of the passage Asian woman, which I completely don't understand. Every single Asian woman that I know in my life is a really strong, resilient fighter. And I started to make different iterations of these of these stories, and one is where you can pick up a phone and listen to hand laundry workers. So I was able to interview one of 3 living hand laundry workers at the time, 10 years ago, who knew my grandfather and was a part of this organization that was targeted by the FBI during McCarthyism. So if you go to the next slides, I'm just gonna speed through a little bit more, and you'll see the redacted papers, the FBI papers that are still redacted to this day, and they should be kind of declassified. But so he's someone who really is a huge inspiration to me, just like my mom. This is continuing and working with communities, sort of deep relationship building. I work with a group called Mingquan, which is out in Queens and Flushing. They started an anti-displacement and Flushing alliance, now fighting the casino they're trying to build in Met Stadium. And I documented people's stories in Flushing. Folks might know right before the pandemic, construction and development grew by 1,000% in Flushing. So the waterfront has become privatized. They've cleaned it up, quote unquote cleaned it up. But now these are during the COVID. I luckily was able to get some of these magazines, real estate magazines, and some of these ads. But on average, a small apartment in the condos is about $1.2 million. This is like early 2020 or 2021. And so kind of documenting people's stories, and the 2 people I documented with, which was a Jamaican American who's second generation, and a Korean woman who's become really an amazing organizer. And what we wanted to tell in this story was really that there's been an erasure of Caribbean Americans in Flushing, particularly during the white flight pushed out, and I was able to kind of meld these stories together. And if you keep going, I worked with a number of activists and organizations to come up with a timeline. There was a direct action bulletin board letting folks know how they could take action. That's Bobby Nathan, who's the Jamaican American, who's really part of the fight against this displacement. He himself facing potential eviction. If you keep going, and then worked with the Queens Museum to create resource guides of how people could actually take action and not just come and see and hear these stories, but what could they actually do. So next. This is part of a project actually with the High Line being and the Whitney Museum being huge gentrifiers, right, in the meatpacking industry, district rather, and Chelsea, but they asked a number of artists to do these sort of these public signs, these installations, and I agreed to it if I was able to obviously talk about the High Line as a main gentrifying force, and highlight the workers in that area, past and present. So this is some portraits of domestic workers and nannies that I interviewed who worked around the High Line, and they talked about how they were treated and how they were looked at and treated and looked at as second-class citizens and this kind of thing. So this was on the High Line, but this is another version at a gallery in the Lower East Side. If you keep going, Displaced in Sunset Park, as Dipti was mentioning, is an ongoing project where I'm looking at the stories and documenting the stories of people who are displaced and facing gentrification in the Latinx and the Chinese part of Sunset Park, Brooklyn, which is where I was born and raised. And so I started to, if you go through just the next couple of slides, started to map out these stories. There are more than this now, using augmented reality, which is a mobile app, image-based app, where you can sort of unlock the stories of people by holding your phone up to the places that they grew up in. So these are some people that I interviewed, some who are teachers in the neighborhood who saw displacement through the eyes of their middle school students. Some just talked directly about just the displacement, and also even in the sort of on the bottom left, Oscar Gill talked about being 18, I believe, or 19, and seeing his father arrested and deported in front of him, and he never saw him again. And so the stories are weaved together, right, around deportation and displacement, and all these stories that around land and everything kind of meld together. And then so these are walks that I led where I showed people how to use the app to unlock stories, and you can continue with the slides. This is a newspaper I created for one of the shows in the neighborhood. One of the galleries in the neighborhood where people could take it and do a walk on their own. And if you go to the next one, it's the directions of how to use this free app to unlock these stories. And as a part of it, these were made available in the space, but also I would give these newspapers to folks to do it on their own. And then if you keep going, you can keep scrolling through. And a lot of my, again, work is through my personal lens. This is an activist panel. As a part of the work is really about highlighting the people who are doing actual organizing work and how people can get involved. So folks who are doing tenant organizing and Shaun Lynn on the left was doing a lot of organizing at the time against the sort of the detention center that's in Sunset Park and what was happening with the abuse of incarcerated folks there and drawing the connections, because oftentimes we get divided, right? It's like NIMBY folks, right? It's like, oh, I don't want that shelter in my backyard. I don't want that in my backyard. And meanwhile, we have more in common than differences. So we were trying to draw some of the issues together. And then if you fast forward to Chinatown Art Brigade, I'm sorry, just because I know of time, you can, this is personal, some collages I started to make from the work I was talking about earlier, Invisible Labor in Chinatown, about my mom and my grandfather, which now has been shown at different places, and then I decided to make a book out of it, which will be coming out in July, and it's my grandfather's photographs and some mixed media collages. But I wanted to close by talking about the collective, Chinatown Art Brigade, so you can kind of go all the way past, yeah. I'll just end on some of these images. So Chinatown Art Brigade, this is our 10th year. We're a collective. We're deliberately not a nonprofit. We never wanted to be a nonprofit for the reason of not being able to do some stuff that, you just really restricted, right? And so our founding has been always tied to working with a nonprofit called CAV, Organizing Asian Communities, and they've been around for 40 years. They have a Chinatown Tenants Union, and they've been in Chinatown since 9/11. All of us know, Lower East Side Chinatown, hyper-gentrified after 9/11. The factories left, people were pushed out. These developers got a lot of money to do land grabs, right? And so these condos and everything that are coming up, the galleries, all of that has been in place for a long time. We've just been seeing it in the last 10 years. So working with Chinatown Art Brigade, working with tenants and residents in the neighborhood through story circles and through workshops, if you continue to scroll through the next few slides, we started mapping out doing mapping, and a lot of these tenants were like, I'm not an artist, what are you talking about? But we come to find out they do, calligraphy, and they write poetry, and they perform Chinese opera, right? So, all of this comes out, right? And then we try to connect the dots. So we map out, we ask them to map out places of importance, places that are no longer there because of gentrification, and now there's the big, condo, right? That used to be the first unionized restaurant, or there's a big luxury hotel that used to be the mom and pop restaurant that they would go to. So if you keep going, we did these, what we call placekeeping walks, one-on-one with young residents, with tenants, and then eventually we did a group walk, and this, A Blade of Grass really helped us with the first big grant that we got, where we're able to actually stipend people and then we did these group walks where people just chalked in front of the 130 galleries at that time, replacing mom and pop places. So people were angry, people did just kind of, whatever moved them, they just started to do it, right? They just started to chalk or sketch or, anything like that. And that was a part of these tenant, resident-led walks. And then if you keep going, then we, as a part of our work was also, this is during the first Trump term. It says, hell no, not my president. We did a lot of these kind of just supporting other activist groups and actions. At Artist Space, we basically called out the galleries as the Trojan horses. We know that it's the developers who are pitting artists and in some places, working class artists and galleries against folks who are longtime tenants, right? But there was a fork in the road, like, what will you do? What will you risk to actually stand with people who are getting pushed out? And oftentimes, there were like 12 gallerists that came to this town hall that Decolonize This Place lent the space at Artist Space. And you know what? They formed a group called Art Against Displacement, and they're a great group. They're all now just individual artists. But you know what? At the end of the day, the stakes were too high, and they realized they didn't really want to get too involved because it's literally commercial galleries and the bottom line. And so just to say that it's really hard, right? Because they're aligned, their economic class interests are quite different. And so you can just keep going through, and we're not going to look at that. This is the Blade of Grass made a little video, which I know we don't have time for, so we can, in the bottom, you can just, and then I'll just say the last couple of years we've been doing a lot of, we were doing outdoor projections, working with tenants from the walks that we did and the mapping, what are the stories and messages they want to put out and project. So oftentimes they used the projections as a way to reach out to other people. They're working 12, 13 hours a day. So where do we reach out to them? Through public projections. And it was their idea, actually. And that's like a great, perfect picture. But where the subways are, right, where people are buying their groceries. So we decided to project with tenants alongside us and organizers so that it was a moment to talk to people about these projections and the messages and use it as an organizing tool. So if you just kind of scroll through those images, people were invited to come and write messages. We work with the Illuminator, which has been around since Occupy Wall Street, and they've been a huge support to our work. Last thing is I'll say that we've been fighting the jail in Chinatown. As we all know, Rikers Island was supposed to close. It's not closing. And in place, these 4 jails in the city, one in Chinatown. And we were not only fighting from an abolitionist lens, fighting the jail, but also outing the Museum of Chinese in America, who received a kickback, basically, of $30 million to basically say that they're going to give their blessing because the city had to buy some people in the community off. So we were one of the first ones to actually pen a letter, do a protest. This jail they broke ground now. They're calling it the jail scraper. It's going to be the tallest jail in the world at 40 stories. And people have been organizing, and our humble contribution is to use art as agitation. So we've been doing all these sort of in these ways of really targeting these cultural institutions like MoCA. They're still getting their money. MoCA was supposed to be on the ground floor of the jail, which is so dystopian and crazy. But now it's not. They're just buying their own space. So if you keep going to the last couple of slides, if you can, so I was talking about the mapping. If you can go to the last few, you can just see these images. This is more mapping that we did with CAV. So not only is there a physical map, but also, like I said, we used augmented reality too to unlock these stories. And it's actually the older folks who were wanted to use QR codes, so we kind of shifted to QR codes for this project, and this is something that we're finishing up and wrapping up. And then if you just keep going, so people can unlock these stories through, for instance, this image of a luxury hotel used to be the last movie theater in Chinatown. If you go to the next slide, it's called Music Palace. And Tamiya Arai, who is a co-founder of Chinatown Art Brigade, actually did the mural with young people on the side from 1978. So that's gone. And next slide is this huge hotel that they evicted and busted the union, and it used to be, the next slide, Silver Palace, which is the first unionized restaurant in Chinatown in 1980. So you go to the next slide, and then people can interact with this. We've been leading walks as well. And then if you could just keep going, we've been doing a lot of support around videos. This is a Creative Time event where we did a whole abolition teach-in roundtable outside during COVID. And if you keep going, you could keep going. And these are some archives that we were invited by Pace University Gallery to show our archives right across the street from City Hall, and it was around the time that Eric Adams just got elected. So it was amazing. We were able to broadcast all kinds of, messages, basically, especially around the jail, to him, because he initially said he wasn't for the jail. Now, obviously, it's moving forward. So this is more of the mapping project, unlocking stories. And we wanted to also use it as a way to project messages to City Hall, like I said, because it's directly across the street from the space. And then last thing is that we activated a space in Chinatown, and we mimicked the borough-based liberation. We call it the Borough-Based Liberation Project, but the jail, each jail project in each borough has to have an office that they do community engagement. The one in Chinatown was never opened at all, but we mimicked it with the same kind of sign. Literally, we were across the street. We activated a space across the street. So we had this space, and we really use this as a space to connect Free Palestine movement, around land and around gentrification. We also wanted to use this moment to actually build solidarity amongst the Asian community and the Chinese American community for Palestine. We got a lot of pushback, but also a lot of support, and people were actually very open to this dialogue. So I'll just kind of close with these images. There was a workshop inviting everyday people to come and do collages. So these are people who they were like, I've never made a collage. And these were some collages that they made. There were some images, and they kind of create these beautiful images, again, connecting resistance and movements I think we called it from Chinatown to Palestine, resistance basically against displacement. And then we work with young folks. We did a workshop also with young people connecting issues in Chinatown and Palestine. So these are just some last images, and I will stop. I know that was a lot of images, but I wanted to end by talking about that, because for us, it's really about the local to the global solidarity that is really, really vital at this moment right now. So thank you.
Well, I just want to thank Shaun, Betty, Avram, and Marisa for just providing, this food for thought. I mean, your work, but also thinking about how we can create spaces of possibility, of spaces that we would like to live in the here and now, and not wait for tomorrow or wait for anybody else. Like, we can do it ourselves. And so thank you for that inspiration to keep working in the here and now. And thank you all for joining us. And you can continue to drink and meet the artists and mingle and commingle.
Yeah, thank you.
So we can buy the books in the back, right? Or
In the front, yes. And yes, I mean, I'm not really good at selling, but please buy the book.
Exactly. And thank you to OR for publishing.
And
the
thank
book.
you,
I know
yes,
this is hard.
Colin,
Thank you,
for
Olivia, for
publishing this. This is amazing.
All right.
Thank you, Olivia, for organizing all of this and putting it together. I know it was a lot of work.
Now, Libby, can we ask you to do one thing? Yes, we take a picture. Oh, exactly. Is Marisa still here? Yeah. Yeah.